The diner was buzzing with the usual Saturday morning crowd. Plates clinked and the smell of pancakes mixed with coffee filled the air. Waitresses moved quickly between tables, carrying trays of food, refilling drinks, and smiling at the regulars. The atmosphere was cheerful, a place where people came not just to eat but to enjoy a moment of calm before the day got hectic. Among the staff, one young waitress stood out for her patience and warmth. She moved from table to table with a natural ease, always attentive, always polite. Today was just another busy day, and she was used to handling the ups and downs of a packed diner. The door swung open and a group of bikers rolled in, the sound of their engines fading into the hum of chatter. Leather jackets, loud laughter, and a strong scent of motorcycle exhaust announced their presence before they even reached the counter. Most of the regulars glanced up but returned to their meals, accustomed to the occasional disruption. The waitress noticed the group but didn't feel alarmed. She had served all kinds of people before, and she knew that first impressions didn't always tell the whole story. The group of bikers took up a large section near the window. They pulled off their helmets, revealing faces with tattoos, sunglasses perched on heads, and expressions that mixed excitement with a certain roughness. One biker in particular seemed different from the rest. He moved with a rigid energy, his eyes scanning the diner as if looking for something to irritate him. The waitress approached with a friendly smile, greeting them warmly. She asked what they would like to drink, noting the biker's tense demeanor. He responded curtly, demanding his order loudly and in a way that made her pause for a second. She smiled politely, jotting down his order. It wasn't unusual for someone to speak harshly when they were tired or in a rush, so she tried not to take it personally. She moved on to the next table, refilling coffee cups and checking on families who had been waiting patiently. Everything seemed normal, just another busy morning. But as she turned to the biker's table to take his food order, something shifted. He had been tapping his fingers aggressively on the table, muttering under his breath. The waitress leaned in politely, ready to help when he suddenly erupted. "Why is my coffee taking so long?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chatter of the diner. People turned to look, some startled, some disapproving. The waitress blinked, taken aback by the intensity of his tone. She had only just arrived at his table, and had not yet even taken the full order. Her hands trembled slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said softly, keeping her voice calm. "I'll get it for you right away." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is ridiculous. You think you can just make me wait? Do you even know who I am?" His friends laughed, but the sound was uneven, unsure, almost nervous. The other patrons shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the sudden outburst. Some quietly muttered to themselves, while others pretended not to notice, hoping the situation wouldn't escalate. The waitress kept her voice steady. "I understand, sir. I'll bring your coffee immediately and your food will be ready soon." She backed away slowly, glancing at the kitchen for support. The chef had noticed the commotion and was moving quickly to prepare the order. The waitress could feel her heart pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew that reacting with anger or frustration would only make things worse. The biker wasn't satisfied. He slammed his fist on the table, making the cups rattle. "This is unacceptable. I demand better service. Right now." The waitress swallowed hard, trying not to let fear take over. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but this was different. There was no clear reason for his anger. It wasn't about the food or the timing or anything she could control. He simply wanted to make someone feel small. Other diners were now fully aware of the situation. A couple sitting nearby whispered nervously to each other. A man reading the newspaper looked up, frowning, clearly annoyed by the disturbance. The waitress could feel their eyes on her, expecting her to somehow handle this storm. She took a deep breath and approached the table again, keeping her tone steady. "Sir, your coffee will be right out and your food will follow shortly," she said calmly. "I appreciate your patience," he sneered, looking around at the gathering attention. "Patience? I don't have patience. You should learn how to serve people properly." His words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. The waitress's hand shook slightly as she held the tray, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. She had learned to smile through anger, to speak softly when others yelled, and to find a way to diffuse tension without escalating it. But this felt different. The intensity of his anger was almost frightening. One of the biker's friends leaned over, trying to calm him. "Hey, relax, man. It's just coffee. Don't make a scene." But the biker ignored him, his attention fixed on the waitress. It was clear that no amount of reasoning would satisfy him in this moment. He wanted to vent, and she had become the target of his frustration. The waitress moved back toward the counter, keeping the tray steady and her voice even. She caught the eye of a coworker, silently signaling for help. The diner staff was trained for emergencies, but this wasn't a typical emergency. This was raw anger aimed at someone who had done nothing wrong. Her mind raced through options, trying to anticipate what he might do next. She had to protect herself, but she also had to maintain the safety and calm of the other patrons. Meanwhile, the other diners watched with bated breath. Some were ready to intervene, while others sat frozen, unsure of how to react. The atmosphere had shifted from a normal Saturday morning to a tense scene where everyone was waiting for the storm to pass. The waitress felt a mix of fear and resolve. She could not let this biker break her composure, no matter how unfair the situation was. The kitchen staff moved quickly, preparing his order with extra care, hoping to resolve the situation before it escalated further. The waitress returned with the tray, placing the coffee gently on the table. "Here is your coffee, sir. Your food will be ready shortly," she said calmly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. For a moment, the biker glared at the cup, his chest heaving. Then he leaned back in his chair, muttering something under his breath. The waitress held her breath, unsure if this moment of calm would last. The other bikers watched silently, a few exchanging uneasy glances. The rest of the diner returned slowly to their meals, the tension still hanging like a cloud over the room. The waitress took a moment to breathe, her heart still racing. She had faced anger before, but there was something about this biker's intensity that made it feel personal, even though it wasn't. She knew she had to stay calm, stay professional, and hope that the situation would pass without further conflict. Her coworkers gave her encouraging nods, silently telling her that she was handling it well. The patrons, now slightly more relaxed, continued their conversations quietly. Still aware of the disruption but trusting that it would end soon, the biker sat back, his eyes scanning the room, and the waitress realized that she had survived the first wave of his anger. She knew this was only the beginning, that things could escalate again, but for now she had maintained her composure. She moved to check on another table, her movements deliberate, her smile intact even though inside she was still shaking. This was her job, and she had learned that sometimes courage meant staying calm when others tried to make you lose control. The diner slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Plates were cleared, drinks refilled, and conversations resumed. Yet the memory of the biker's sudden outburst lingered in the air, a reminder that even in ordinary places, unpredictable moments could occur. The waitress knew that she had to be ready for anything, to remain composed and to continue serving with the same professionalism she had always shown. She glanced at the biker, who now seemed slightly quieter, and prepared herself for whatever might come next, knowing that the story was far from over. The tension in the diner was far from over. Even though the waitress had managed to place the coffee on the biker's table, the room felt heavy with unease. The biker's sharp eyes scanned the diners, and it was clear he was looking for any small mistake to blow up again. His friends tried to keep him calm, speaking softly and nudging him, but he barely acknowledged them. Each movement he made seemed calculated to provoke, and the waitress could feel the weight of his attention every time she walked past the table. She moved cautiously, attending to her other tables with practiced ease. Her movements were smooth, almost like a dance, but her mind was alert, anticipating the biker's next action. Some of the regular patrons whispered to each other, expressing concern for her. The couple that had been watching from the corner of the diner clutched each other's hands, uneasy at how quickly anger could erupt in such a peaceful place. The man with the newspaper frowned, shaking his head, clearly annoyed that his morning coffee came with a side of tension. The biker slammed his hand on the table again, making the coffee cup rattle slightly. He leaned forward, his voice sharp, and demanded to know why his food wasn't already on the table. The waitress remained calm, keeping her tone steady. "Your order is being prepared, sir. It will be out very soon," she said politely. He ignored her explanation and turned to one of his friends. "What are you waiting for? Get them moving! This is ridiculous." His friend tried to reason with him, speaking quietly and putting a hand on his shoulder. "Relax, man. They're getting it ready. Just calm down." But the biker shrugged him off, clearly not interested in listening. He had built his anger into a shield, and no word seemed to penetrate it. The other diners were now fully aware of the growing tension. Mothers shielded their children from the confrontation, hoping to keep them calm. Elderly patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of whether they should intervene. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had dealt with rude customers before, but this intensity was different. This was personal, even though she had done nothing to deserve it. She reminded herself to keep calm, to stay professional, and to rely on her training to diffuse the situation without escalating it. The kitchen staff was moving quickly, preparing his order with extra care. They understood the delicacy of the situation. One of the cooks glanced toward the waitress and nodded, silently offering support. She returned the gesture with a small, appreciative smile. Even with the tension pressing down on her, she felt strengthened by the quiet solidarity of her co-workers. The biker's yelling grew louder, his voice cutting through the din of the busy diner. "Do you think you can ignore me? You think I'll let this slide?" He slammed his fists on the table, rattling cutlery and frightening nearby diners. The waitress remained composed, though her heart raced. She knew that staying calm was her only option. If she lost her temper or reacted angrily, the situation could spiral out of control quickly. She took another deep breath and spoke softly, keeping her voice measured. "I'm here to help you, sir. Your food will be served shortly. Thank you for your patience." The biker's friends exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle. One of them whispered something, trying again to calm him, but he waved them off. He wasn't interested in listening to anyone. He wanted to dominate, to assert control over the moment. His anger wasn't about the coffee or the food. It was about power and intimidation. The waitress understood this, which made her even more determined to stay composed. Other diners began to murmur quietly among themselves. Some offered supportive glances toward the waitress, recognizing her bravery. Others pretended not to notice, hoping to avoid drawing the biker's attention. The atmosphere in the diner was tense, a mixture of fear, frustration, and curiosity. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the next move, unsure how the confrontation would end. The waitress returned to the biker's table with the tray, setting down condiments and napkins carefully. She kept her voice soft and professional, explaining again that the food would be ready shortly. The biker glared at her, muttering something under his breath, but did not shout. It was a small victory, a pause in the storm, though everyone could feel that the tension had not fully lifted. The diner staff continued to work quickly, trying to get the order out as fast as possible without making mistakes. The waitress's hands shook slightly as she moved back to the counter. She glanced at her coworkers, who offered silent encouragement. She reminded herself that staying calm in the face of anger was not weakness. It was strength. It was the ability to protect herself, maintain dignity, and prevent the situation from escalating further. She felt a sense of pride for handling the first wave of the biker's aggression with composure. As the minutes passed, the biker's anger seemed to simmer slightly, though it was clear he could flare up at any moment. He leaned back in his chair, glaring at the room, and muttered under his breath. The other bikers stayed mostly quiet, though they occasionally exchanged uneasy looks, unsure of how to handle their friend's behavior. The patrons of the diner remained alert, watching the scene unfold with cautious interest. The waitress returned to her other tables, checking on diners, refilling drinks, and making small talk. Her smile remained polite, though her mind was alert for any signs of further aggression. She moved with careful precision, knowing that any sudden movement could draw unwanted attention. Her experience in busy diners had prepared her for challenging customers, but this felt different. This was a test of her ability to remain calm and professional under extreme pressure. The kitchen staff continued to work efficiently, preparing the biker's food with extra care. The chef understood the delicacy of the situation and moved quickly to ensure that there would be no mistakes. The other cooks offered small gestures of support to the waitress, reinforcing a sense of teamwork and solidarity. Their quiet confidence helped her feel more secure, even as the tension in the room remained high. The biker slammed his hand on the table again, this time knocking over a glass. Water spilled across the table, and the waitress quickly moved to clean it up. Her movements were precise, her voice calm. "I'll take care of that, sir. Please be careful." Her tone was gentle but firm, signaling that while she would serve with professionalism, She would not tolerate physical aggression. The biker glared at her but did not respond immediately, giving her a small window of control over the situation. Other patrons began to settle back into their routines, though the tension lingered. Conversations were quieter, and the usual laughter of a busy diner was replaced with cautious murmurs. The waitress noticed the supportive glances from a few diners, and it gave her strength. Even in a tense moment, people could recognize courage and integrity. She reminded herself that her calm and professional demeanor was influencing the room, helping to prevent the situation from escalating further. The biker finally leaned back, muttering to himself, and for a moment, the diner felt like it was returning to normal. The waitress took a deep breath, knowing that the peace could be temporary but grateful for the small reprieve. She moved to check on another table, her steps careful, her voice steady, keeping the calm and professional tone that had helped her navigate the situation so far. The tension in the diner had not fully dissipated, but the initial storm of anger had passed. The waitress knew that she had handled the first wave well, maintaining her composure and protecting herself from harm. She also knew that the situation could escalate again, and she remained vigilant, ready to respond with the same professionalism and calm. Her confidence grew slightly with each successful interaction, reinforcing her ability to manage difficult situations without losing her dignity. The biker's friends continued to sit quietly, occasionally whispering to each other, unsure of how to respond to their companion's behavior. The other diners gradually returned to their meals, though their eyes occasionally flicked toward the table where the confrontation had occurred. The atmosphere in the diner was still tense, but there was a sense of cautious optimism that the situation would not escalate further. As the waitress moved through the diner, attending to other customers, she felt a mix of relief and alertness. She had survived the first round of aggression and had maintained her composure. She had also observed the impact of her calm and professional demeanor on the room, noticing how it helped to steady the other patrons and diffuse some of the tension. It was a lesson in resilience, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from handling conflict with dignity. Though the biker's anger had not completely vanished, the immediate threat had passed. The waitress knew that her ability to stay calm, professional, and composed had prevented the situation from spiraling out of control. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination, ready to continue her work and face whatever challenges the rest of the day might bring. The diner gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the memory of the confrontation lingered in the air, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of human behavior and the importance of courage and composure in the face of anger. The diner had finally settled into a fragile calm, but the air was still thick with tension. The waitress moved with careful precision, checking on tables, refilling drinks, and keeping an eye on the biker's table. She had survived the initial outbursts and maintained her composure, but she knew that one wrong move could reignite the storm. Her heart beat steadily, trained to remain calm under pressure, yet every nerve in her body remained alert. Each glance from the biker was a reminder of the fragility of the peace. Among the other diners, conversations had slowed. People returned to their meals, but they were cautious, aware that the disruption could flare up again at any moment. Some whispered quietly to their companions, remarking on the intensity of the situation. A few patrons watched the waitress, admiring her poise and professionalism under such pressure. She felt the weight of their attention, a mix of admiration and concern, but it gave her quiet strength. It was then that another presence shifted the energy in the room. A man, unassuming at first glance, had entered the diner and found a seat near the back. He ordered a simple breakfast and began reading the menu, casually observing the room. Few people recognized him immediately, but there was something different in the way he carried himself. His calm and grounded demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos that had enveloped the diner. The waitress noticed him almost instantly. There was a sense of awareness about him that was hard to describe. He noticed the tension around the biker's table but did not rush or react with alarm. Instead, he seemed to assess the situation quietly, his eyes calm and steady. For the first time since the biker had arrived, the waitress felt a slight sense of hope. Perhaps there was someone in the diner who could help diffuse the escalating situation. The biker, unaware of the newcomer's presence, continued his restless behavior. He tapped his fingers on the table, muttered complaints under his breath, and occasionally slammed his fists. His friends attempted to calm him again, but their efforts were ignored. The waitress approached the table once more, speaking softly, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Your food will be ready soon, sir. Thank you for your patience." Her words, calm and steady, were met with a sharp glare. It was then that the man from the back of the diner stood up. He didn't move aggressively or raise his voice. Instead, he walked with a quiet confidence toward the biker's table. His presence alone seemed to change the atmosphere. Conversations paused, diners watched with interest, and even the kitchen staff slowed for a moment, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The biker noticed him and immediately shifted his attention. He scowled as if challenging the man silently, testing to see if he would back down. The man approached the table, keeping his tone calm and even. He looked directly at the biker, but there was no aggression in his eyes, only a quiet authority that seemed to demand respect without force. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but not loud. "You need to stop yelling. It's not acceptable to treat someone this way." The biker laughed nervously, surprised by the unexpected confrontation. He muttered something about being in charge and not needing to be told what to do. His friends looked uneasy, unsure of how their companion would react. The waitress, standing a few feet away, felt a mix of relief and curiosity. She recognized the presence of someone who could influence the situation without escalating it further. The man continued, speaking directly to the biker with clarity and calm. "You can express frustration without yelling. This waitress is doing her job and doesn't deserve to be treated this way. If you continue, there will be consequences for your behavior." His words were simple, direct, and powerful. There was no anger in his tone, only a sense of fairness and respect that made the biker pause. The other diners felt the shift in energy immediately. Conversations stopped entirely, and eyes focused on the interaction between the biker and the newcomer. Even the kitchen staff paused, watching from the counter, sensing that this was the turning point in the unfolding drama. The diner, once filled with tension, now held a quiet anticipation, waiting to see how the biker would respond. The biker's posture stiffened. He glanced around, noticing the attention of everyone in the room. There was no one else stepping forward to challenge him, only the calm, confident figure who had addressed him directly. For a moment, the biker's aggression faltered, and he muttered under his breath, unsure of how to proceed. His friends exchanged uncertain glances, realizing that the balance of power in the room had shifted. The waitress felt her pulse slow slightly, grateful for the intervention. She continued to stand back, observing quietly, her presence still attentive but less tense. She recognized the strength and calm authority, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to command respect. The newcomer's actions demonstrated that courage could be quiet, yet immensely powerful. The man's gaze remained steady, unwavering even as the biker's anger threatened to resurface. "You have a choice," he said softly. "You can either continue to cause a scene and face the consequences, or you can act with respect and allow everyone to enjoy their time here." His tone was measured, giving the biker room to make a decision without losing face. The biker's friends leaned in again, whispering advice, trying to guide him toward calming down. This time the biker seemed to hesitate, torn between his usual impulse to dominate and the realization that his behavior was no longer unchallenged. The diner held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable response. For the first time, the biker's shouting stopped. His chest heaved as he processed the calm confrontation. He glanced around at the other diners, noting the supportive glances and quiet murmurs of approval toward the man who had intervened. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, muttering an apology under his breath. The shift was subtle but noticeable. The tension in the diner eased slightly, replaced by a cautious relief. The waitress exhaled quietly, her hands relaxing as she realized that the immediate danger had passed. The biker's intensity had not disappeared entirely, but it was no longer consuming the room. The calm authority of the newcomer had created space for everyone to breathe, and the diner began to return to its regular rhythm. Plates clinked again, conversations resumed in quiet tones, and the sense of fear and unease lifted. The newcomer, having addressed the situation, returned to his seat, sitting down as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He ordered his breakfast and continued reading his menu, blending seamlessly back into the background. The subtle humility of his actions reinforced the impact of his intervention. The waitress, still attentive to her tables, felt a renewed sense of hope and confidence. She recognized that courage could manifest in unexpected ways, and that even a single calm presence could change the course of events. The biker's friends relaxed as well, realizing that their companion's anger had been tempered by the encounter. They exchanged quiet words, attempting to ease the tension and reassure him. The biker, still muttering under his breath, seemed to struggle with the sudden loss of control. The waitress observed the scene with a mix of empathy and caution, understanding that this was a human moment, complex and unpredictable, yet ultimately moving toward resolution. The other diners returned fully to their meals, though their conversations carried a subtle energy of admiration for the way the situation had been handled. Some patrons quietly expressed support for the waitress, recognizing her role in maintaining professionalism and composure. Others nodded toward the newcomer, acknowledging the quiet authority that had brought a sense of calm to the diner. The atmosphere, once charged with tension, was now marked by a collective sense of relief and respect. The waitress moved through the diner with renewed focus, checking on tables, refilling drinks, and keeping a careful watch on the biker's table. She had learned an important lesson in the power of calm authority, the value of staying composed under pressure, and the significance of support from those who notice injustice. Her confidence grew, bolstered by the knowledge that even in moments of intense challenge, resolution was possible. As the morning continued, the diner returned to its ordinary rhythm. Breakfasts were served, coffee was refilled, and the hum of conversation returned to normal. Yet the memory of the confrontation lingered in the air, a reminder of human vulnerability and strength, the unpredictable nature of anger, and the quiet power of composure and courage. The waitress felt a deep sense of gratitude for the intervention, knowing that it had changed the course of the morning and reinforced the importance of empathy, respect, and human dignity. The diner was slowly returning to its normal rhythm, but the tension around the biker's table had not completely vanished. The calm authority of the newcomer had created a pause, but everyone sensed that the situation was far from fully resolved. The biker sat rigidly, scowling, his fingers drumming against the table as if trying to release the energy that still bubbled inside him. His friends exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how their companion would react next. The waitress, standing a few steps away, kept a careful watch on the table. Her heart still raced, but she had regained a measure of confidence. She had faced his aggression before and had managed to remain composed. Now, with the newcomer's quiet intervention, she felt a small but meaningful relief. She understood that his anger wasn't directed at her personally, but the unpredictability of his temper still demanded her attention. The newcomer remained seated, calm and observant. He did not speak immediately, allowing the biker a moment to process the situation. The silence was heavy, almost tangible, as the biker struggled with his own frustration. He wanted to assert control, to prove dominance, but the presence of someone who neither feared nor flinched at his behavior unsettled him. The diner held its collective breath, watching closely, sensing that the next few moments would determine whether the morning's tension would escalate or dissolve. Finally, the newcomer spoke, his voice steady and measured. "I understand that you're frustrated, but yelling and slamming your fists won't solve anything. You have a choice in how you respond. You can continue to create chaos, or you can handle the situation with respect." His words were calm, deliberate, and carried a quiet weight that made the biker pause. The biker's friends leaned in, whispering, trying again to calm him, but this time he did not react immediately. The words had landed in a way that he hadn't expected. They were not accusations, not insults, just a clear statement of fact and expectation. The other diners watched closely, some nodding slightly at the truth in the words, others simply observing with cautious interest. The kitchen staff paused, quietly preparing plates, aware that the confrontation could flare up again at any moment. The biker muttered something under his breath, his chest heaving as he struggled with the choice before him. His friends exchanged tense looks, unsure whether to intervene further or let the situation unfold naturally. The waitress remained calm, her hands steady, her presence attentive. She knew that the newcomer's intervention had shifted the balance of power, but she also recognized that the biker's reaction could still be unpredictable. The newcomer continued to speak, maintaining a calm and authoritative tone. "Everyone in this diner is here to enjoy their meal, not to witness anger directed at someone who is simply doing her job. You can be frustrated, yes, but how you choose to express that frustration is up to you." His words were firm, yet they lacked any hint of hostility. There was a clarity and honesty in his message that resonated throughout the room. The biker's face softened slightly, though he did not fully relax. He glanced around, noticing the eyes of the other diners, the quiet nods of approval toward the newcomer and the supportive glances toward the waitress. For the first time, he seemed aware of how his actions were perceived, and the weight of that awareness began to influence his behavior. The room, once charged with fear and uncertainty, now held a tentative sense of reflection. The newcomer's presence acted as a mirror, showing the biker the impact of his anger. He had not spoken harshly or threatened him. He had simply stated the reality of the situation and allowed the biker to choose how to respond. The clarity of this approach created a space for the biker to reconsider his actions without losing face entirely. His friends watched closely, whispering encouragements, subtly guiding him toward a calmer response. After a long pause, the biker leaned back in his chair, his fists unclenching slightly. He muttered something that could almost be considered an apology, though his pride remained intact. The newcomer nodded, acknowledging the small but meaningful step. The diner breathed collectively, sensing the tension ease just a fraction. The waitress felt a wave of relief wash over her, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she observed the subtle shift. The biker's friends exhaled, their nervous energy easing as well. They exchanged quiet words among themselves, trying to support their companion without drawing further attention. The other diners returned to their meals, conversations resuming in hushed tones, though occasional glances toward the table remained. The atmosphere in the diner was slowly moving toward a sense of cautious normalcy. The waitress approached the biker's table once more, her voice calm and even. "Your food is ready, sir," she said softly. She placed the tray carefully on the table, ensuring that everything was in order. The biker glanced at the plates, muttering a quiet acknowledgement. It was not a full apology, but it was a step in the right direction. The tension that had dominated the morning had begun to loosen its grip. The newcomer remained seated, observing silently, allowing the situation to unfold without interference. His presence alone had created a space for the biker to regain composure, and he chose not to assert further authority unnecessarily. The diners sensed this subtle power, the quiet strength that did not rely on force but on clarity, presence, and respect. The kitchen staff continued their work, plates moving smoothly to the tables as the diner gradually returned to its regular rhythm. The biker's demeanor continued to soften. He no longer slammed his fists or raised his voice. His friends began to speak quietly, attempting to ease him further, and he responded with subtle nods, a sign that he was beginning to regain control of his own emotions. The waitress felt a sense of quiet triumph. Her patience, composure, and professionalism, combined with the newcomer's intervention, had prevented the situation from spiraling out of control. It was a victory, not loud or dramatic, but deeply meaningful. Other diners began to relax fully, returning to their meals and conversations without fear. Some patrons offered supportive glances toward the waitress, acknowledging her strength and courage in the face of aggression. Others nodded toward the newcomer, recognizing the impact of calm authority and respectful confrontation. The atmosphere in the diner, once tense and charged with fear, was now marked by relief and quiet admiration. The biker, still seated at his table, muttered something to his friends and gestured toward the plates in front of him. He began to eat, slowly at first, as if testing the waters of a calmer interaction. His friends followed suit, engaging in quiet conversation, a subtle sign that the tension had diminished significantly. The waitress continued to serve other tables, her movements confident, her presence calm, knowing that the immediate threat had been contained. The newcomer's impact remained evident. The subtle strength of his intervention had reshaped the dynamics of the diner without aggression, without shouting, and without creating a scene. He had allowed the biker to maintain a sense of dignity while gently guiding him toward self-control and respect. The waitress understood the value of this approach, recognizing that courage and authority could manifest quietly, influencing outcomes in profound ways. As the morning progressed, the diner returned to its usual rhythm. Plates were cleared, drinks were refilled, and conversations flowed naturally. The memory of the confrontation lingered, but it no longer dominated the atmosphere. The waitress felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. She had navigated a difficult situation with patience, professionalism, and composure, supported by the quiet authority of someone who had understood how to influence without force. The biker continued to eat quietly, his aggression now tempered. He engaged minimally with his friends, and there were no further outbursts. The waitress moved through the diner, attentive but not tense, aware that the storm had passed. Patrons returned to their routines, grateful for the return of normalcy. The kitchen staff continued their work efficiently, supporting the overall calm that had settled over the room. In the quiet aftermath, the waitress reflected on the events of the morning. She recognized the importance of staying composed in the face of aggression, the power of calm authority, and the subtle ways in which human behavior could be influenced through respect and clarity. The diner had returned to normal, but the lessons learned and the courage displayed would linger long after the morning ended. It was a moment of growth, both for her and for everyone who had witnessed the confrontation unfold, demonstrating the quiet strength that emerges when patience, empathy, and integrity guide human interactions. The diner was finally calm, the storm having passed like a wave retreating from the shore. The biker sat quietly at his table, his friends murmuring softly as they finished their meals. The intensity that had filled the room earlier had faded, leaving behind a gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of cutlery, and the smell of coffee and pancakes that now seemed comforting rather than tense. The waitress moved among the tables, checking on customers, refilling drinks, and ensuring that everyone was satisfied. Her hands were steady, her smile calm, but inside she still felt a ripple of relief from the morning's chaos. She glanced at the biker's table, noticing a subtle change in him. He was still rough around the edges, his leather jacket slightly rumpled, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed. He muttered something to one of his friends, who nodded and offered a small smile. There were no more sharp gestures, no loud complaints, and no attempts to dominate the room. The waitress realized that the intervention of the newcomer had not just stopped the shouting, it had created a moment of reflection for the biker. He had faced the consequences of his behavior without humiliation, and it seemed to have grounded him in a way she had not expected. The diner's other patrons were returning to their routines as well. Conversations resumed, laughter slowly reappeared, and the general warmth of the busy Saturday morning returned. Some patrons exchanged quiet nods toward the waitress, offering silent appreciation for her composure under pressure. Others glanced at the newcomer, who sat quietly observing the diner without drawing attention to himself. It was a subtle acknowledgement, an understanding that sometimes courage and influence come quietly rather than loudly. The waitress took a deep breath, allowing herself a small moment of satisfaction. She had faced anger head-on, maintained her dignity, and navigated the situation with care and professionalism. She had learned that courage often meant patience, calmness, and the ability to keep moving forward despite fear. She reminded herself that even small actions, when combined with integrity and composure, could make a meaningful difference.